Picture yourself walking through the streets of Rome in the year 400 AD. Everywhere you turn, you see monuments built from white marble stretching toward the heavens. Water flows through massive aqueducts that cross the landscape for miles. The Colosseum rises before you, a monument to engineering that can seat 50,000 spectators for a single event. You're standing at the heart of an empire that has endured for a millennium, an empire whose territories stretch across 3 continents, an empire whose power seems absolute and permanent. If you approached any Roman citizen in that moment and suggested that within a single human lifetime, within just 76 years, these streets would lie abandoned and this empire would cease to exist, they would dismiss you as delusional. They would tell you that Rome's supremacy is guaranteed, that its institutions are unshakable, that collapse is impossible for a civilization this advanced. Now, transport yourself to the present day, stand in the heart of Manhattan and watch the towers of glass and steel pierce the clouds. Watch the digital displays announce new market peaks. Consider the naval fleets that patrol every major ocean on the planet. If I suggested to you that by the year 2026, the structural integrity of the American system would reach a breaking point, your reaction would mirror that ancient Roman's response. You would insist that American dominance is permanent, that the system is too sophisticated to fail. But history does not unfold randomly, it follows patterns. It repeats itself because human nature remains constant across centuries. We are not exceptional. We are simply the current generation playing out a script that has been performed many times before. And the evidence suggests we have entered the closing scenes. Quick question, do you think America is still in its Rome is eternal phase? Or have we already started the decline? Drop your take in the comments. What makes Rome's collapse particularly unsettling is not simply that it occurred. It is how precisely it mirrors our present circumstances. The similarities are not superficial. They are structural. They are measurable. And they are impossible to ignore. Rome did not disintegrate in a single catastrophic moment. It was destroyed by a gradual disease, a specific policy error that corrupted its foundations over generations until the entire structure buckled. Today, the United States has adopted that identical policy. We are exhibiting the same symptoms. And based on the documented life cycles of dominant empires throughout history, we are approaching the same terminal stage. The year 2026 is not chosen arbitrarily. It represents the 250th anniversary of American independence. 250 years happens to be the average duration of a global superpower before it experiences a fundamental transformation or breakdown. This is not speculation. This is historical data. What follows is not merely a history lesson. It is a diagnostic examination of our own civilization. We're going to identify the specific fatal error that destroyed Rome and demonstrate that America is not simply repeating it, but accelerating it beyond anything the ancient world could have imagined. To grasp how the story ends, we must first understand how it began. Rome was not always a society characterized by corruption and excess. During the era of the Roman Republic, it was built on what ancient writers described as fundamental virtues. It was constructed by disciplined men, farmers who took up weapons when their land faced threats, fought to defend their communities, and then returned to their fields. The culture emphasized duty, restraint, and collective purpose. This philosophical foundation was reflected in their monetary system. For centuries, Roman commerce operated on the silver denarius. This was a coin struck from nearly pure silver. It represented sound money. When you possessed a denarius, you held something with inherent worth. You did not need to trust promises from political authorities. You only needed to trust the metal itself. This monetary stability created a reliable foundation for economic development. It incentivized saving rather than reckless spending. It enabled long-term investment and planning. It funded the construction of roads that connected the empire, aqueducts that delivered fresh water to cities, and the legions that expanded Roman territory across the known world. Because the currency had intrinsic value, the economic system functioned with integrity, but prosperity carries its own dangers. As Rome's military campaigns brought more territory under its control, extraordinary wealth poured into the capital. The governing class evolved. The farmer soldiers became hereditary aristocrats. The cultural focus shifted from building and producing to acquiring and consuming. By the time the Republic collapsed and gave way to the Roman Empire under Augustus Caesar, the conditions for eventual failure had already taken root. The empire's territory was vast, extending from the British Isles to the deserts of North Africa and Egypt. Sustaining this geographic sprawl required enormous resources. The costs were staggering. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers needed to be paid and supplied at outposts thousands of miles from Rome. Infrastructure across multiple continents required constant construction and maintenance. And perhaps most significantly, the population of Rome itself needed to be kept pacified. This necessity gave birth to the concept we now call bread and circuses. To prevent the massive unemployed urban population from causing civil unrest, the emperors distributed free wheat and staged elaborate gladiatorial spectacles. These were the ancient equivalent of welfare programs and mass entertainment designed to distract and pacify. All of this consumption drained resources at an unsustainable rate. The gold and silver that had once flowed into Rome from conquered territories began to diminish. The empire's expenses started exceeding its revenues. Rome faced a structural budget shortfall. When confronted with this deficit, an emperor had two fundamental options. The first option was politically difficult. He could reduce expenditures, which would anger the masses dependent on government provisions, or he could increase taxation, which would provoke the wealthy and influential classes. Neither approach led to popularity or glory, so emperors consistently chose the second option, the politically expedient path. The path that seemed to solve the problem without forcing anyone to sacrifice. They chose to manipulate the currency. This is the mechanism that destroyed Rome. Pay careful attention here, because this is precisely the stage we have reached today. The debasement began gradually. Around the year 64 AD, Emperor Nero confronted a financial emergency. He required additional funds to service his debts and finance his extravagant lifestyle. He conceived what seemed like an ingenious solution. He ordered that silver denarius coins be collected, melted down, and mixed with cheaper metals like copper before being struck into new coins. Suddenly, Nero possessed more coins to distribute. The new denarius appeared identical to the old version on its surface. It bore the emperor's portrait. It was officially declared to maintain the same value, but in reality it contained less actual silver. It possessed less genuine worth. This was the ancient world's version of monetary expansion. Nero had debased the currency. If this is the kind of history you want more of, leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Initially, the consequences were not obvious. The system continued to function. But subsequent emperors recognized how simple this solution appeared. When they needed funds for a military campaign, they added more base metal to the mix. When they wanted to construct a new palace, they reduced the silver content further. Over the following 2 centuries, this process accelerated dramatically. By the reign of Marcus Aurelius, around 170 AD, the denarius contained approximately 75% silver. 50 years later, the proportion had fallen to 50%. By the year 270 AD, under Emperor Aurelian, the denarius had become essentially fraudulent. It contained barely 5% silver. It was fundamentally a bronze coin with a thin silver coating that wore away quickly with normal use. The Roman government had systematically stolen wealth from its citizens through a slow, incremental process spanning 200 years. But economic reality cannot be permanently deceived. Eventually, the people of the empire recognized what was occurring. Merchants, traders, and soldiers realized that the coins they received were debased. They understood that the government was lying about the true value of the currency. The result was economic catastrophe on a massive scale. Because the money had lost genuine value, merchants demanded more of it in exchange for the same goods. The prices of wheat, olive oil, and basic clothing skyrocketed beyond recognition. Historical records document that in the 2nd century, a specific measure of wheat might cost around 8 drachmas. By the 3rd century, that identical measure required 120,000 drachmas. This was not normal inflation. This was a currency collapse. The accumulated savings of ordinary citizens were obliterated. If someone had spent their entire working life saving silver coins, the government's new debased coins rendered those savings worthless. The middle class simply evaporated. Desperate emperors attempted increasingly extreme interventions. Emperor Diocletian issued his edict on maximum prices in the year 301 AD. This decree made it illegal to charge prices above government-mandated limits, with violations punishable by death. The policy failed. Catastrophically, merchants simply withdrew goods from the market rather than sell at artificial prices. Black markets flourished. Shortages spread throughout the empire. People starved in the streets because the economic system had completely disintegrated. The soldiers stationed on the empire's frontiers, realizing they were being compensated with worthless metal, began abandoning their posts. They mutinied. They prioritized their own survival over defending a distant capital that was systematically robbing them of their purchasing power. This is the critical insight. The barbarian tribes did not suddenly develop superior military capabilities. They succeeded because Rome had weakened itself from within. The financial corruption had destroyed the social compact. Why would soldiers risk their lives for an empire that paid them in counterfeit money? Why would producers create goods for a system that punished those who saved? When monetary trust dies, social cohesion dies. And when social cohesion dies, the empire dies. The Visigoths entered Rome in 410 AD, not through epic battle, but by walking into a hollowed-out shell. They encountered the ruins of a once great civilization that had already destroyed itself. Now, let us examine ourselves through that same lens. Let us consider the United States of America. Just as Rome began with currency backed by tangible value, America's early monetary system was anchored to gold. The US dollar functioned as a claim check. It was a guarantee that the government could not simply manufacture money without limit. This discipline helped construct the most productive industrial economy in human history. Just as Rome became the dominant military power after major conflicts with rival civilizations, America emerged from World War II as the world's unquestioned superpower. We established a global military presence. We deployed forces to every corner of the planet. We transitioned from a nation defined by production and hard work to a nation characterized by consumption and accumulating debt. And just as Rome reached a point where its ambitions exceeded its resources, we arrived at a similar crossroads. We wanted both extensive military spending to maintain our global presence and extensive social programs for the domestic population. Beginning in the 1960s, the fiscal pressure intensified. We were simultaneously fighting the Vietnam War and launching ambitious Great Society programs. Gold began flowing out of U.S. Treasury reserves as foreign nations demanded payment in actual metal. So in 1971, President Richard Nixon executed exactly the same maneuver that Emperor Nero had performed. He terminated the convertibility of dollars into gold. He declared that the U.S. dollar would no longer be redeemable for a fixed amount of gold. In that moment, the U.S. dollar stopped being a receipt for something real and became a fiat currency. Its value became based entirely on confidence in the United States government. We had transitioned from the silver denarius to the copper coin. Since 1971, the debasement of the U.S. dollar has proceeded without interruption, but unlike ancient Rome, which was constrained by the physical limitations of collecting, melting, and restrike coins, we face no such constraints. We can generate trillions of dollars through digital entries in Federal Reserve computers. This allows us to accelerate the collapse. What required 2 centuries for Rome to accomplish, we are achieving in approximately 50 years. Consider the national debt trajectory. The United States needed more than 200 years to accumulate its first $1 trillion in debt. Today, we add $1 trillion to the debt every several months. The current debt has surpassed $34 trillion. This figure is so enormous that human cognition cannot properly grasp its scale. How are we funding our obligations? We are manufacturing the currency. The Federal Reserve creates new dollars from nothing to purchase government debt. This is precisely the same mechanism as mixing base metal into the silver coin. Every new dollar that is created dilutes the purchasing power of every existing dollar that citizens work to earn. The fractures are already visible. The inflation is already occurring. You experience it every time you purchase groceries. You experience it when you observe housing prices that have become completely disconnected from incomes and economic fundamentals. The government will present statistics claiming inflation is modest, just as Roman emperors insisted their copper coins were genuine silver. But your budget understands the truth. We are witnessing the breakdown of the social contract. Just as late-stage Rome experienced intense internal division, America faces polarization greater than at any point since the Gilded Age. The gap between the ultra-wealthy who benefit from monetary expansion and the working population is wider than it has been in generations. We are witnessing our own version of bread and circuses. We are distracted by perpetual entertainment cycles, social media dopamine algorithms, and celebrity controversies, while the foundations of our economic structure are being quietly consumed from within. We maintain a population heavily dependent on government assistance, creating a political dynamic that makes reducing spending essentially impossible. Any attempt to cut benefits triggers immediate backlash. And now consider the timeline. Sir John Glubb, a British military historian, analyzed the life cycles of dominant empires, spanning 3,000 years of history. He identified a consistent pattern. The Assyrian Empire, the Persian Empire, the Greek Empire, the Roman Republic, the Ottoman Empire, the British Empire. They all lasted for an average of approximately 250 years. They progress through identical stages: the age of pioneers and conquest, the age of commerce and prosperity, the age of affluence and intellectual achievement, and finally, the age of decadence and decline. The age of decadence is characterized by unsustainable debt, mass immigration without assimilation, extensive welfare systems, and the erosion of the shared values that built the empire in the first place. Does any of this sound familiar? The United States declared independence in 1776. Add 250 years to that date, and you arrive at 2026. We are mathematically positioned at the conclusion of the historical average lifespan for a dominant empire. We have exhibited every symptom on the diagnostic checklist for imperial collapse. We have the massive debt. We have the currency debasement. We have the military overextension. We have the profound social division. Rome's ultimate error was believing that economic laws did not apply to them simply because they were Rome. They believed they could perpetually debase their currency and that the world would continue to accept it indefinitely. America's ultimate error is identical. We believe that because the US dollar serves as the world's reserve currency, we can create infinite quantities of it without consequences. We believe we can accumulate more debt than has ever existed in human history and never face the requirement to repay it in real terms. But the rest of the world is recognizing the reality. Just as merchants in ancient Rome eventually refused to accept debased denarii, we observe nations across the globe from China to Russia to Saudi Arabia, actively taking steps to reduce their dependence on the US dollar in international trade. These are the modern equivalent of the barbarians at the gates. They are not attacking with military force. They are attacking by simply declining to accept our debt and currency. If the world stops accepting dollars in exchange for tangible goods like petroleum and manufactured products, all those trillions of printed dollars will flood back into the domestic American economy. The result will not be the manageable inflation we currently experience. It will be hyperinflation that destroys the middle class overnight. The year 2026 is not a prediction that civilization ends on a specific Tuesday. It is a historical marker. It represents the point where the mathematical burden of our debt and monetary debasement becomes structurally unsustainable. It is the point where interest payments on the national debt exceed our entire defense budget. It is the point of no return. When Rome fell, it was not the end of human civilization. Life continued. The Italian peninsula endured. But the structure of that society, the security, the prosperity, and the global dominance disappeared into centuries of chaos and stagnation. Those who were dependent on the system were crushed when the system collapsed. Those who survived and even prospered during Rome's fall were the individuals who recognized the warning signs. They were the ones who held real assets, land, precious metals, productive skills, rather than trusting in the debased currency of a failing state. The warning signs are illuminated in bright red. History is shouting at us across the millennia. The error has already been committed. The poison is already circulating through the system. The only remaining questions are how much time remains and what you personally are going to do to prepare for the inevitable reset. We cannot halt the cycle of empires. It operates on a scale larger than any individual. It is larger than any political party or leader. But we can learn from the pattern. We can refuse to be like that Roman citizen standing in the Colosseum, convinced that the celebration will continue forever. We can open our eyes and see the ruins before they fully materialize. The clock is counting down toward 2026. The final act has begun.